Hello, welcome to Dancewise, releasing trauma through movement and expressive arts. Today, I'm going to be talking to Jenny Deupree, who's truly one of the wise elders. Jenny is the founder of the Neskaya Movement Arts Center in New Hampshire.
Aha, got it.
Hello, Jenny.
Hello, Venetia.
Well, this is fantastic to talk to you because I'm sure there's many people who are going to be watching this who are well aware of the wonderful work the Neskaya Movement Arts Center is doing, but maybe not everyone is aware of you, or they may know your name, but they may not be aware of who you are because you now are in a retirement community about an hour away from Neskaya. So you're not able to pop down like you used to, and you're no longer teaching. So I think it's wonderful that you're here to talk about the story of Neskaya and what inspired you, because you're a really good example of someone who managed to turn early childhood trauma into the lotus of wonderful possibilities, not only for yourself, your own healing, but for the wider community. And I think that is a really inspiring story, because it shows people that however difficult their early life or later trauma, there's always a nugget which can be transformed into something positive for not only necessarily the individual, but the wider community. So I think that's really inspiring. So let's begin the story, and perhaps you can tell everyone how Neskaya became Neskaya.
Well, at the time I was married to Dana Johnson, who was an Aikido teacher. And I started actually, when I moved to Franconia, I started teaching folk dance. And then I heard of sacred circle dance, and I said, sacred circle dance, what's that? So I went to Danville, where they were doing sacred circle dance to celebrate the fall equinox during the Dowsers convention. And I got there and they were doing dances I already knew with a candle in the center. And it was like, well, of course I knew that. So actually it gave me a very good start as a dance teacher, because I was already teaching folk dance. So adding the sacred dimension was very easy. So then, let me see, I think that was in '88. No, it wasn't that long afterward. We used to joke, because my husband was teaching Aikido in a school gym, and I was teaching sacred dance in the elementary school gym, which was actually a pretty beautiful room, but it was a gym. So we would joke, we would say, what this town needs is a dance hall dojo. Dojos where you do martial arts. And then I went to see my cousin Lydia, and she had built herself a dance studio in a barn on their property. And it was a regulation dance studio with mirrors and a bar and the rest of it. Well, I didn't want that for my sacred dance. I wanted a sacred space. But I was filled with the energy of jealousy, and I came home to Dana and said, let's do it, let's build it. So we did. Little did I know what I was getting into. Oh, go ahead.
And what I was going to say was, and it wasn't just any old building, was it? It was built according to the principles of sacred geometry to create that sacred space.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very, very different sort of building. All you have to do is think about hyperbolic paraboloids.
Could you tell us what hyperboloids are?
Well, I wish I had something to describe it with, but what you need is a square of something flexible, square, and then you bend two of the corners down and you bend the other two up. And so between the upward corners, you get a saddle curve, and between the downward corners, you get I don't know what to call it, a mountain curve. So it's curved in two directions. and the fabric has to stretch when you move it like that. So it's a very unusual shape. And we discovered it has great acoustical properties. But it was quite a job. It took us several years.
And what was the inspiration to have it? Is it 12 sides? But
the 12 sides. Dana thought this up. It's 12 sides. No, it's based. The dance floor is 12 sides, but the building itself is only 8 sides. And what you have to do is create a 12-sided figure, kind of like the zodiac, and cut it in quarters. And then you have, in each quarter, you have the first side and the third side, and you extend them out until they join. So you get a shape that's, it's not a regular octagon. It's a little bit different. And Dana designed it that way because he wanted the hyperbolic paraboloid roof to come down to a point at this point and to be up in a, gee, do we have a picture of Neskaya we could show, or have people seen it?
No, I'll put a picture on. And
then the curves that go up go over the west entrance. It is rather hard to describe, but it is a very magical building. And the way we got the name, when we applied for a building permit, they described it as a fitness center. And we said, it is not a fitness center. And one of us said, let's call it after a tower on Darkover. And the other one said, Neskaya. Boom, that was it. No question, this building was to be called Neskaya. It practically told us. And Darkover is Marion Zimmer Bradley's science fiction planet. Her stories about it are quite interesting because she does them from different ages, and different things have happened with the history. She doesn't care if she's writing this to fit in with an earlier book. She just writes. Actually, it turns out that her Darkover stories were like opening sketches for the Mists of Avalon. Do you know the Mists of Avalon?
The Mists of Avalon used to be my favorite book.
Yes, well, that's Marion Zimmer Bradley. And before she wrote the Mists of Avalon, she wrote all the stuff about Darkover. So on Darkover, people with psychic powers work together in buildings. They're called towers. And the people work in circles. And of course, here we are doing sacred circle dance. I mean, it's just, you know, what could be better? So, and we wrote her a letter and said, is it okay if we use the name Neskaya? And we actually gave her a fill out the blanks letter to write back to us. So, and a self-addressed stamped envelope to make it easy. So she said, yes, that's fine with me, and signed her name. And we were going to frame it, never got around to it. So it's in a file folder somewhere waiting.
Amazing, yes. And I also read on your blog, there's so many interesting things you say on your blog, that you felt like the presence of the ancestors throughout the...
Well, I feel the ancestors when we do the old folk dances. I have this sense of circles of people going back literally thousands of years. I mean, people have been doing those dances for a long, long time. And actually, I realized more recently that the folk dances are indigenous because they come out of the land, and they were certainly first created by the people living there who'd been living there for a long time. So, yeah.
And I imagine in those early, I mean, I'm just talking off the top of my head, but I imagine that those early people, even before communities were properly formed, that they were so in tune with the energy of the land and the spirals and the waves and the energy, that they would have moved their bodies quite instinctively and naturally in those movements across the land. And maybe that's before they became formal dancers. I don't know, but it's...
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. It's certainly possible.
Seems
Another thing that amuses me is in England, there are all the stone circles. And there are frequently stories about a group of women dancing on the solstice and being turned into stone because they were committing a terrible sin. But I think it's just a memory of when people used to dance inside the circles. Where there's a space to dance.
I know people who have seen beings, if you like to call it that, within the circles of the stones. You know, that energy is still very potent, and it's like a portal.
Yep.
So yeah, it's real. And interesting also was your innate, you know, you felt like a big drawing to the Celtic lineage.
Oh yes, well that's my own background, my own indigenous background, Scots and Irish. And I had always envied the Greeks and the Israelis, their wonderful folk dances. And the first time I went to folk dance in Brunswick, somebody brought in an album and she taught us simple dance. And then when she put the music on, it was bagpipes. And I went immediately to Scotland, which actually it wasn't Scotland, it was Brittany. I'd never heard of Brittany. I didn't know it was a Celtic country. It was the music of Alan Stivell, who plays the Celtic harp, that's great stuff. So yeah, so then my Celtic soul rose up and said, it's about time. This is your dance. So, and that was before I'd heard of sacred circle dance.
So what year are we talking now? In the 80s?
Let's see. I moved to Brunswick in 75. So that was before sacred circle dance even existed. But I had done folk dance in Paris in 1964, which is the year I graduated with a degree in astronomy.
Oh, you got a degree in astronomy?
Yes, and the universe sent me to Stonehenge, very, very cleverly choreographed.
So you really are bridging heaven and earth with your life's work, and bringing that, you probably, the ancient astronomers, bringing that wisdom down into embodiment. Yeah, because we could talk a lot about that.
Good.
So now the dancing, you said in Paris, which introduced you to the Greek dances, and that resonated with you. But you still at that point hadn't tapped into the fact that you hadn't been aware of it, that actually early childhood trauma was, had created I like to call these trauma glitches. I like to call them glitches.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't feel like trauma led me to folk dance. I feel like that was my my vocation, my purpose in coming to earth this time. Maybe I don't know what to call it, my higher self, my oversoul, knew that trauma and dance could work together. In fact, I don't know if you read the piece about how Neskaya, no, I should say Francis Weller, talks about the difference between initiation and trauma. And they both start the same way, where you get separated from your old identity and brought into a liminal world where, all the boundaries are kind of fluid. And if you don't have an initiation ceremony, then you're kind of stuck there. If you do have an initiation ceremony, you come out into a wider world. And what makes initiation possible is, and he says, the space, the ancestors, which my sense are the dancers who danced, for thousands of years, the elders who are the elders of the tribe, and I think of somebody like Bernard Vosian or Laura Shannon, who are people who discovered the dances and handed them down to us, and then ceremony and ritual. And that's what, when I teach sacred circle dance, I mean, start by lighting the candles and calling the spirits. So I do ceremony whenever I do a sacred circle dance evening of 2 hours. Yeah, so it's all right there at Neskaya.
And you were teaching at Neskaya until recently, was that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And when did you stop that? You retired?
No, it actually was after I moved here. I had thought I would be able to go back every other week. What happened was, and my therapist said, she said, you are beyond the end of your resources. You have to rest. And of course, downsizing and moving is a lot of work. And I just ended up being so tired that the drive back simply cost too much and I couldn't do it, which was a great disappointment. I mean, I felt like I really lost something. Yeah, fortunately, I found a supportive community here, in the sense of the basics, having people around all the time and having meals taken care of. I've always been food challenged for some reason. I don't know if it goes back to the trauma. Who knows? It's early trauma is mysterious.
Would you like to talk a bit about that early trauma and how that also how it helped you with the dance, or rather how the dance released it?
Boy, let's see. Well, my understanding of what happened to me is that I was left alone too often and too long. I think people don't realize that a baby can be that easily traumatized. I certainly thought trauma had to have a violent thing happen. And my parents were alcoholics, but they weren't violent. I was never hit. So I didn't see how I could be traumatized until I learned that trauma results when your system, meaning your brain and nervous system, when an event happens that overwhelms your brain and nervous system and you can't process it. It's a bit like not being able to digest food, and then you end up having undigested food in your system, which isn't good for you. And if you're a baby, what happens is if you're left alone and your parent, no one comes back, if no one comes to feed you, you will die. And the moment your reptilian brainstem concludes that you will die is when you enter into the realm of trauma. And a baby can't fight and it can't flee. So I think people are now beginning to learn that it isn't just fight or flight, that there's also freeze. If you can't flee and you can't fight, then you freeze. So I went into freeze. And I think that created a long-standing severe depression, which is why when I finally got on medication for depression and I got to normal brain chemistry, it was like, what's this? I've never felt like this, which is quite a statement, but even that didn't say anything about trauma. So it was a friend, and she had grown up in a horribly abusive and violent family, and she's still struggling with multiple trauma because she didn't have family money. I was lucky; I had family money. Yeah, so she's stuck on the welfare system, and therapists who will take insurance, and the good ones don't have to take insurance. Some of them have sliding scales. But so I was lucky. So let me see, how did I get there? Oh, it was reading Peter Levine's book called Waking the Tiger, where he describes what creates trauma. And that's when I realized.
And how old were you when you suddenly realized that
I was in my late 50s.
Oh, in your 50s? Okay.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So up to that point, you were completely unaware that you'd been traumatized.
Right. And it really took Peter Levine's book. And so then I started doing somatic experiencing, which is the method of healing that he developed, partly from observing animals, because trauma is held in the body. And yeah, shake it off, literally, because he has pictures. I actually did some of the training and then I wasn't able to keep going, but he showed a picture. I think it's a possum. It's not playing possum, it's actually in freeze. And the coyote comes up and noses it, and it's clearly immobile. So the coyote decides it's dead and walks away. And then the possum shakes itself off and walks away. And but that's because when your system goes into fight or flight, a tremendous amount of energy builds up. And if you actually do fight or flee and survive, apparently you can be exhausted for 3 days afterward. So it's a lot of energy that builds up. And if you don't fight or flee, then that energy is trapped in the body. And that's what creates the symptoms. Your body is constantly trying to complete the gesture of running away. So that's interesting stuff. So doing somatic experiencing made a difference. So then I thought, okay, if this is supposed to help with trauma, then I must have been traumatized. And I deduced that I was left alone too long, partly because, and especially, I mean, this is where COVID has been terrible for me, because of the social distancing. And I think actually I'm really, Bessel van der Kolk, who is a trauma expert, says that what heals is touch, rhythm, and movement. And you think that's what a mother does, rocking her baby. Actually, another interesting thing I found out is a baby can't regulate its nervous system. If your nervous system goes up, if it gets excited, you can't bring it down by yourself. You need your caretaker to comfort you thousands of times before you learn to do it. So that's something else I didn't know. And my mother was not the sort who knew how to comfort a baby.
And I think with the wartime generation,
yes, that too. Yeah, I mean, she was all by herself. My father was overseas fighting a war when she gave birth to me. So that had to have been hard. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for her. But yeah. So let's see, where was I going? So I've just been thinking about, I went back to Neskaya, I think it was in October, because a good friend who had moved away was going to be around and she was going to dance with us and I wanted to see her. So I went and we were dancing inside the building. And I said, I want to hold hands. I said, and we can use hand sanitizer. Of course, it did get us closer than the recommended distance. And I said, anybody who doesn't want to hold hands, that's okay. But we all held hands and did the dances. And then just a week ago, I went again and we didn't hold hands. We stayed socially distanced. Now, when I went in October, I came back feeling wonderful. Last Sunday, I came back feeling vaguely disappointed and I think it was partly because there were some new people there. But when I think about it, and I think about van der Kolk talking about the importance of touch. I mean, we do need to be with people in the body for our nervous systems to regulate by resonance. But maybe, especially for trauma, maybe touch is more important than we realize. So, you know, I've just been thinking about that and wondering. I know that I would often go in to teach a session on Sunday evening feeling depressed, but I would start teaching and 2 hours later, I'd feel great. So obviously the teaching was doing something for me. Yeah, so I don't know quite what to make of all of that. But
well, I think, you know, the stress and the mental health after lockdown, and particularly the isolation, it's just criminal.
Yes.
And it brings me back really to what you were saying earlier. My take of the whole episode was a collective initiation for the human race, really.
Yeah.
And
Yes, but then we need the ceremony.
and to move beyond that, it's
Yeah.
not a case of just, oh, everything's back to normal. To recognize what actually happened on
Yeah.
individually.
Well,
and
that normal was never healthy,
yeah.
or at least not our normal.
Mm.
Yeah.
So and I did see that you said that Neskaya was a container for initiation, which I like that idea. Yes, and I wrote down what you'd said. It was, as we were building Neskaya, every time I drove through Franconia Notch, I prayed to the spirits of the Notch to help us build a building that would raise the consciousness of everyone who entered it. When the foundation was being poured, I sat on the hill above and chanted to Kanzian, the Bodhisattva of compassion.
Yep.
So I thought that.
Yep. Yep. He was there.
And so could you tell me a little bit about that presence and how that ties into this initiation chamber? It sounds like something out of the Great Pyramid, doesn't it? An initiation chamber.
Yeah, yeah. I got interested in Buddhism. Actually, this was my first winter. I'd come back from California after a romance that broke up rather disastrously. And I always felt more at home in New England. So I came back to Portland, Maine, and I was severely depressed. I mean, I knew I was somewhat depressed, but I was actually in a severe depression. And my brother came and he said to me, Buddha says life is suffering. And I felt like I hit bottom. I felt like I had been floundering, and boom, life is suffering. So I said, tell me more about this Buddha. So he was getting involved with the Zen Center in Rochester. So I began to sit Zazen and traveled to Rochester to do sesshin, which is a long silent retreat. And it really helped a lot. And although there was more that helped, I think being among people doing a training program, I didn't realize how much I needed to be around people and not alone so much. And I'm sure the meditation helped. And that's where I learned the chant Tu Kanon, which is what, let's see, the Bodhisattva of compassion is called Avalokiteshvara in India. And he's a man or a male bodhisattva, but bodhisattvas have no gender. She is Chenrezig in Tibet, Kanon in Japan, and Kuan Yin in China, but it's the same being. So I was chanting a chant I had learned in the Zen Center while they poured the foundation, while they poured the floor. And we went back there afterward and felt a lot of energy in the floor. At the time, I've gone back through my journal and checked out these notes. It's fascinating to me. And then I realized that I had a statue of the Bodhisattva, actually, that we had more than one. And it started out at Neskaya, there's a huge wall in the east facing the dance floor where we can hang paintings and large pieces of cloth, and it's for decoration. The entrance is to the west and the east wall is on the other side. So let's see, I think the statue of the Bodhisattva started on the south side of the east wall, and then it moved around. It went to the north side, it went to the center, it sat up on top of the east wall. There were several different statues. And then somehow it ended up on the north side of the east wall, and it just stayed there. We didn't move it again. I don't know exactly why, but one year at summer solstice, the sun was setting and it shone through the northwest window right onto the Bodhisattva. So I said, oh, I mean, here we are, Stonehenge again, the heel stone. So that seemed pretty special. So then at winter solstice, I checked again, and the winter solstice alignment isn't quite as striking, but when the sun is in the south, it shines through one of the high up south windows onto the Bodhisattva of compassion. Well, excuse me, I think the building has been under the protection of the Bodhisattva of compassion since the beginning. And I didn't realize it, but there she was, or he.
If the energy of Kuan Yin, I love Kuan Yin. It's a very pure.
Yeah.
Frequency.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. So you've got the Bodhisattva there, and you've got the ancestors keeping guard. And I'm sure in the wilds of New Hampshire, do you get a lot of wildlife in the grounds as well?
Oh, gee. I don't remember seeing a bear. We did have bears visit us in our house in Franconia, and we had bears. I had bears come to the house I built for myself, which is right across the road from Neskaya, which was great because I could, Neskaya was right across the street. And moose, of course, deer. Yeah.
Because you did early on, you did spend some time in Findhorn, didn't you? When
yes.
But in the 80s again.
When did I first go to Findhorn? I think it was in the late 70s, actually.
All right.
Although I know, well, it's funny not to be able to remember. Getting old. Because
that was like one of the first communities using different principles for growing things, and
right,
wasn't it? Way before many other.
Oh, I know. I think the first time I went was right after the change of the millennium. Now that I think of it, I did my first circle dance teacher training was with Peter Valance in Massachusetts. So, yeah. So I started teaching it almost right away, although I still called it folk dance, but I had the understanding that there was more here than just folk dances.
Yes. So with your long, I won't call it career because that makes it sound a bit one-dimensional, but your rich life of dance and building Neskaya, what key elements would you say were the essence of,
oh gosh,
is there any particular some things which shine out beyond anything else, or
not really,
the whole journey?
And I realized it. I mean, one of the things I used to do at Neskaya when we first opened it is I would change the hangings, big pieces of cloth hanging from the balcony 8 times a year for the equinoxes, the solstices, and the cross quarter days. So we always celebrated those with appropriate dances. I think I always felt I was more of a pagan than a Christian anyway. Winter solstice has always been my most important holiday. So yes, decorating the building was a big piece for me, and creating ceremonies with the dances. I love doing that. And at some point we started doing something we called all day dances. And people came and brought food and we literally danced all day.
Wow.
Yeah. I think, oh no, it must have been our first Moosemas. We also celebrated a holiday called Moosemas, which is absolutely hilarious. I think Moosemas. I think there's still a page on the Neskaya website that describes Moosemas. It was developed by a group of pagans who said that it could get very tiring, what with chanting and dancing and ceremony and all the rest of it. So we declared that there had to be a holiday sacred to resting. So they named it after Bullwinkle the moose.
Oh,
And they talked about lounging around, eating potato chips and I can't remember now what all they said, but it did sound like a lot of fun. So we declared our first Moosmas for the Friday after Thanksgiving, so as not to partake in the great American ritual of shopping.
oh. I quite like the idea of a moosmas.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes.
Called a slouching. I seem to remember a slouching.
Yeah. So that was fun. Moosmas was fun.
Yes. And so, to people listening, is there anything you'd like to, before we finish, you'd like to tell them that would like to pass on, which can either help them on their journey or another pearl of wisdom?
Gosh, I don't know. Follow your heart. Sometimes I say that Neskaya is the most selfish thing I've ever done. I built a playhouse and invited all my friends to come play with me. That was why I did it. I wanted to be able to dance, and it was a place for my friends to come and dance with me, the kind of dance that was meaningful to them.
And it's continuing.
So I don't see it as a big philanthropic gift to the world. I see it as
And how many people, I pass through the doors of Neskaya now, sort of every year?
My goodness, I have no idea. Can't begin to imagine.
So I suppose with Zoom now, the things with Zoom.
Yes. Well, I noticed one, and actually I think one of the reasons why Zoom doesn't work for me is we can't hold hands on Zoom. Mm-hmm. And one of the few times that it did work for me was when Kayla was teaching and she was in Neskaya. So the picture of the teacher had the building. So when she went around in the circle, I could really almost feel it. So I like that a lot, because often the teacher is just dancing in her living room and there's not a lot of room. So
yes.
Yeah. So
I think that sounds, follow your heart, follow your joy, and by doing that, everybody's uplifted.
Yep. That sounds good. I vote for that.
It's true. If everybody followed their joy, it would rub off on everyone, wouldn't it?
Yep.
So I think that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Jenny, for talking to me and inspiring people and talking to Dancewise. That's brilliant. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
We've got a PS here. We've stopped recording and now we've started again.
So I was thinking about Marina Bear's dance. It's called Night Walking. It's choreographed to a piece of music by Carlos Nakai, who's I love him. I don't know what tribe he's from, but he's definitely an indigenous flute player. And she had it on the tape deck on her car, and she was driving through the southwestern desert, and the steps came to her. So I always feel like something like that isn't made up, it's channeled, or however you want it. It's pulled out of the, imaginal realm. But you start, I think there's a drum beat, dum, 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 heartbeat drum beat. And so you start step, 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 and you walk around the outside and you take 8 steps. Then you take 8 steps into the center, raising, actually, I think it's your left arm. Then when you're in the center, you tap with your left foot and step sideways. Tap with your left foot and step sideways. Tap with your right foot and close. Tap, step, tap, close. And Marina said she learned that from the Hopi, and it was called a ghost step, but it was for calling the ancestors. So you do that step, or you can call it 8 times or 4 times. And then you back up again, lowering your arm, and you turn to the right and start doing the circle. Well, when we do it at winter solstice in Neskaya, the building is completely dark. We turn, during the first half of the dancing, we turn the lights down bit by bit. So it gets darker and darker until only the single candle is left burning in the middle of the floor. So then when we start night walking, our shadows, taller than we are coming around the building. They're in a circle outside us because it's a circular building. So there they are. And when we walk into the center, they lean over us. Their shadows are right in the top of the building. So you definitely feel the presence of the ancestors. So I really like doing that dance at winter solstice.
Amazing.
Having that result. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that again is another lovely note to end with, to know that the ancestors are always, their presence is always there.
Yeah.
And our duty is to heal ourselves on this level so that the ancestors can then heal all the way up.
Yep.
So once again, I shall say thank you very much, Jenny, and for that PS. And often the little PSs are the golden nuggets are there. So again, thank you so much.
I'm delighted to have been able to share. Okay.